Right, now, literally, what I'm going to do is I am going to do a little mini recap, right, of what we talked about prior to half term, right? And what I'll do is at certain points I'll say, if you've got any questions, then you can unmute yourself if you've got a microphone, and then what we'll do is we'll then try and answer the questions, right? So we started off, and I've got a new board as well. This is like dead posh, okay, but I have no idea how to use it. That's the majority of the time. I will do my annotations in red, right? But then if I do start writing in red and somebody can't see it, which is what happened in the last lesson, right, then just unmute yourself and let me know. Right, so we're starting off with diffusion, right? This is then what we talked about. Diffusion, right, remember the deodorant, right? If I spray deodorant in the corner, what happens is diffusion is the movement of molecules from a high concentration to an area of low concentration, right? And also, the other key thing is the fact that it is passive, right? Passive means no energy is used up at all, right? You've got to know the definition of that. You've got to know diffusion is the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Okay. Then what we did is we started to talk about diffusion and breathing. Now, if you remember, there's your lungs there. Okay, so what you do is you breathe in through where I've done that red line there. Oxygen goes into these small tubes right the way to the ends, and what you'll then find right at the end of your alveoli. Oxygen is then absorbed in all these little alveoli down at the bottom here. Okay. Carbon dioxide then goes in exactly in the opposite direction. So I do carbon dioxide in blue, carbon dioxide then goes out, comes out of your mouth, and is then breathed out. And that is your waste gas. Now, this is then also what we then talked about, right? Which is then how diffusion actually works. Where you've got these red blood cells that come in here, right? Red blood cells come in there. Now, for the purpose of this, they're blue, just to kind of differentiate between them. And when they come in here, they are deoxygenated. So if they're deoxygenated, it means all the oxygens then come out of them. But in here, you have got carbon dioxide, which is your waste product. Air coming in here has got lots and lots of oxygen in it. Right, it's basically straight out of the atmosphere, and it's got about 21% oxygen. That oxygen diffuses across into the capillaries and goes into one of these red blood cells. When it goes into one of these red blood cells, it keeps on picking up oxygen, picking up oxygen, picking up oxygen, until at the end here, it is oxygenated blood, and that oxygenated blood goes off around your body, goes to your muscles, your brain, wherever it may well be, and that oxygen is then used. It's then recycled, and it's something like every 3, 4, 5 minutes, it keeps on going round and it comes in at the other side. That is diffusion of oxygen from a high concentration in the middle here to a low concentration in the capillary. Carbon dioxide does exactly the opposite thing. Carbon dioxide is high concentration here, and it's low concentration, low CO2 inside there. Diffusion is the movement of particles from a high concentration to a low concentration, so carbon dioxide goes into the alveoli and then goes out. Okay, that's your carbon dioxide. That's basically a recap from what we talked about before. I also showed you this picture here, right, where you've got your little alveoli, which are blue dots, and then the red dots, and then all your capillaries. Now, this is probably the question, right, that you are then going to get asked in your exam, right? They might ask you about diffusion, how diffusion actually works, right? Then what they're going to do is they're going to ask, how are alveoli adapted? Okay, Luke, can you hear me? Luke, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Right, so can you see the screen as normal, just with like a little picture of me in there as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, I'm assuming that everybody's the same. Okay, now, what you're going to have to do now is that there in your exercise book is the title, which is how our alveoli adapted. Okay? There are 4 ways in which the alveoli that we've then just looked at here are adapted so that they can do diffusion better. Right? And this will be a 4-mark question in your exam. Number 1 is they are very thin. Okay? So they are literally 1 cell thick. So the alveoli, right, the little balls, little things that look like grapes, right, the actual capillaries around the outside of them are incredibly thin. They're also covered with a network of fine capillaries. So really, really thin little blood vessels, they are surrounded by it, right, which is then that other picture that I showed you. They are moist, right? If it's not moist, then diffusion won't happen. So something where it's dry, right, it won't happen at all. They also have a large combined surface area. Okay, so if I just draw lungs here, right, lungs there, right, then I work out the surface area inside the lungs here, right, just by working out literally the area is incredibly small. As soon as you add in loads and loads and loads of alveoli, and then you measure the inside of every single one of those circles, all of a sudden you've got a large combined surface area. So, in your exercise books, right, what I want you to do is write the title and the date and all that sort of stuff, right, how are alveoli adapted. In bullet points, I then want you to summarise very thin, network of fine capillaries, moist, and large combined surface area. Luke, right, when you've finished, can you tell me, and I'll work on the assumption that everybody's finishing at about the same time. 2 or 3 minutes. How are we doing, Luke? Are we done?
On the last one, sir.
Nice one. Anyone's got any questions? Now would be a good time to ask.
I finished now, sir.
Nice one. Okay, I'm working on the assumption that everybody else has pretty much finished. All right. Now, again, this video is going to be posted at the end of this lesson, right? So you'll be able to access it again if you need to. Right. But the GCSE question will be: how are alveoli adapted to allow for diffusion to happen more efficiently? And literally, what you would do is you would say alveoli are adapted by being very thin and only one cell thick. They are also adapted because they are covered with a network of fine capillaries, allowing diffusion to go across into the blood. They are moist, encouraging gas molecules to dissolve, and they also have a large surface area, right, which allows a lot of diffusion to actually happen. If they just ask for one large surface area, tends to be the one that they're after. That is why the alveoli actually exist. Okay, now, next one. Now, what they will do, if I flip back in the actual PowerPoint itself, right, what they'll be is, they'll be specialized exchange surfaces. This basically means where diffusion happens, right, and it is the way that you kind of stay alive. It happens in the alveoli, and it also happens in your digestive system. Okay, now, what we're going to do now is we're just going to go through the digestive system, okay, and how all this ends up working. Now, for this, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to dead quickly just go through some of the key food things. Right now, what I can do on here is theoretically, right, Luke, can you just tell me, can you just see a blue screen?
Yeah, I can.
Luke, can you see a blue screen?
Yeah, I can see a blue screen. Yeah. Can you hear?
Imogen, right, I know you like talking, right? Can you see a blue screen?
Yeah.
Can anybody hear me?
You can't hear us.
This is funny.
Hello?
Oh my days.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you, but you can't hear us. I don't think.
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
Hello. Why can't you hear us?
Who do you think's got COVID?
No, I'm not here.
Yeah. Oi, when I did that, then did it stop recording? Could you not hear me?
No, we could hear you, but you couldn't hear us.
All right, okay, you can hear me, but I couldn't hear you. Right, okay, fair enough. Right, I heard your last sentence, by the way, then, Imogen. Okay. Right. Diffusion. Now, obviously, you couldn't, I don't know why the actual speaker's cut out then. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through a little bit about digestion. Right? When you eat food, right, there's three main ones that you need to know about. You need to know about carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And basically, those three things, right, you need to absorb, right? But when you actually eat them, they are huge, great big long chains like that, right? And they are way, 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 way too big for diffusion to actually happen. So what your body has to do, it has to break down these big long chains here, and it cuts into little individual pieces like that. Okay. Now, the idea of going back to that other screen then was so that you could then, I could then write things down. Now, carbohydrates, what they are is they are a big long chain of glucose. Okay, so that there, if that was a carbohydrate, what it would be just like a huge, great big long chain of glucose. They are then cut up using an enzyme. Proteins are a big long chain of, I call it AA sometimes, or amino acids. What that is, big long chain of proteins, cut, and it's actually cut up by something called a protease into individual amino acids. As soon as they are glucose, they're small. As soon as they're amino acids, they're also small, they can then diffuse. The last one, fats. Fats are broken down into things called fatty acids plus glycerol. Now, this is then stuff that you should probably have done in year 7 or year 8, right? And then there will be then more detail at a later time, right? So basically, digestion is carbohydrates. When they're digested, they break up into glucose. Proteins, when they're digested, they break up into amino acids. Fats, when they're broken up, they break up into fatty acids and glycerol. In your exercise books, I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to write down carbohydrates, when they're digested, into glucose. Proteins, when they're digested, break up into amino acids. Fats, when they're digested, break up into fatty acids and glycerol. They are then small enough to diffuse. 2 minutes. Okay, so now what you should have down is all about digestion. There's carbohydrates, when you eat them, so we're talking about starches, things like bread, things like sugar, anything that's kind of full of starch. The carbohydrates in there break down into glucose. A good kind of little experiment that you can do is if you get some bread, and you can just go down to the kitchen now, it's kind of weird, right, get some bread, chew on bread for about a minute. What it'll do, it tastes like bread to start off with, then the enzymes in your mouth will then break it down, and eventually it gets sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. Proteins, right, they get broken down into amino acids, fats into fatty acids and glycerols. The other key point is, where does this actually happen? Right, now if you think about your digestive system, okay, you've done it before, mouth chews up the food and breaks it down into small pieces. Esophagus takes it down to the stomach. Stomach then has got acid in it, and it starts the process of digestion. When it comes out of the stomach, the first part of your digestive system is then the part then that absorbs the food, which is your small intestine. And your small intestine is that big, long, wiggly bit right in the middle, right where the food is actually absorbed. The large intestine, which is after the small intestine, is purely there to absorb water and make your feces more solid. Okay, so food is absorbed in the small intestine. Now, this is then a picture of, or 2 pictures of the small intestine. This top one here, right, what that does is that shows the inside of the intestine, and they're a little bit like fingers that are just sticking out. And what they are is they're called villi, right? They are V-I-L-I. Okay, zoomed in a little bit further, right, this one on the right, they are then villi again. This one here, on the bottom left, right, what this one is villi that have got a bit more food on them, it's not particularly very clean or a bit older, right, and this one then, right, is the same thing again, where what we've got is then we've got villi that are a bit older. Now, the whole point in this kind of section now is, why do we have those little finger things, right, out in the middle, right, of your intestine? And again, you can then sort of work out exactly the reason why based on the stuff we've already talked about. This here again, right, just click onto this one, right, this here again is like more of a computer generated one, right, where at the bottom here, all the way across the bottom here is the edge of the small intestine. Coming out of the edge of the small intestine are your villi, which is that, and it's that, okay? Within the villi itself, it's got the blood vessels. So you can see the red lines in there, and the blue lines that are in there. They are then small individual blood vessels, capillaries that go inside there. Now, what I'm going to want you to do is, in your exercise books, under the title Digestion, okay, I want you to then write down the word villus. Villus means one individual villi, right? Do a bit of a sketch of it, please. Try, if you've got red and blue, to colour the red, which is oxygenated blood going in, blue, which is then the blood then coming out, and the yellow up the middle is then the lymph, okay? So, The yellow is the lymph. The red is blood in. And the blue is then blood out. Okay, so I'm going to give you probably about 5 minutes just to do a drawing of that, please. If you do have other colours, if you haven't got time to do it now, then you can watch it again later. All right, and Luke, again, when you've finished, can you let me know, please?
I'll finish it.
Right, nice one, Luke. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm I'm kind of working on the assumption that everybody's basically done that, right? So on this screen that you've got here now, right, you've got the red lines that are going up the middle, right, which is blood in. You've got the blue lines there that are blood out, right? It labels those as capillaries. You've got the yellow in the middle, which is lymph. Now, lymph doesn't come up very often, but basically what lymph is, it kind of gets rid of all the rubbish, right? So anything that your body doesn't want, it's kind of like another sort of digestive or another blood system, and it takes all the bad stuff away. And it goes to your kidneys, and then it gets filtered out. That little diagram that you've actually got, and I'm just going to take off my little diagrams that I've got there, my writing, sorry, if I can. Okay, now the way that all this works is these around, right, those around the outside of there, okay, these cells around the outside of here, right, are incredibly thin, right, and you can see again how thick they actually are. Okay, these little white bits there are something completely different. They are something called active transport, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Right, so this is your digestive system, this is your small intestine, and what I've got there is these loads of glucose here. Okay, that's glucose. Now, how does this work? Inside that red blood there, you've got very, very little glucose, so there might be the odd one or two. Diffusion is moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. So the highest concentration of glucose is outside, in the actual intestine itself. So what they do is they move from there, and they go in. Okay, that's diffusion. And it's moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay, exactly the same thing happens, more moves in. If you've got proteins, right, which are then maybe slightly just almost bigger, even though they're small as well. You've got a high concentration of amino acids outside, low concentration of amino acids inside, and what they do is they move in by diffusion. Okay, and exactly the same with fatty acids and glycerol, what they do is they move in now as well. So that is diffusion. And the whole process of that is to absorb all the goodness out of your small intestine. These bits here are active transport. This is then where there is, I'm going to do this at probably a later lesson. This is then where, in the middle here, you've got a higher concentration than outside. And basically what it does, it kind of sucks things in. Right, so it'd be the same as me spraying a deodorant can, right, over in the corner of the room. And what will then happen is the deodorant spreads around the room, but eventually what happens is I could then do active transport and I can suck it all back in. So active transport uses energy, where, as we know, diffusion is passive. Okay? Now, next little task, right, that I'm going to ask you to do, just going to go past these, is this question here. Okay, it's a 6-mark question, right, and it kind of works a little bit on the stuff that we've just talked about. And I'm going to want you to write out that question, and then I'm going to want you to answer it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at who's online at the moment, all right, and then try and choose some people. Explain how the villi in the small intestine are adapted to maximize the rate of absorption of digestive food products. Okay, and I'll give you a clue, there are 4 answers. So write out that question, then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be expecting you to write out a full question answer based on the 4 points. So Luke, just tell me when you've written that question out again. And I'm going to have a look to see who's online. It's pretty poor turnout, really. Right, that's 9 of you. Okay, so Luke, when you've written the question, right, have a little think about what the answer can be, because you all know them already, right? Explain how the villi in the small intestine are adapted to maximize diffusion. Okay, you all know them.
But we're not writing the question.
Yeah, just have a think about it before you actually answer it, right? But there's four answers. Isabella, what do you think they are? Have you got a mic? Or are you just ignoring me? Legacy, have you got a mic? Imogen, I know you have. Imogen? Luke, what they like, they just guide them out,
Yes, sir.
Right, Imogen, right? What do you think, right, the villi, or how are they adapted?
Well, the villi in the small intestine, they provide a large surface area
That's one.
with a efficient network of capillaries.
That's brilliant. Two.
Um, they pass. They're very thin.
Three.
They are moist.
Moist. That's four. Brilliant. Right. So what you've done then is you've realised then that the adaptions for the villi is exactly the same for the alveoli, and we've done that before. Well done, Imogen. Okay. Right. So what I want everybody to do now is I want you to, you've written that question in full sentences underneath. I want you to then answer that question based on then what Imogen told us. So it is the stuff for the alveoli that we wrote down before. Large surface area, thin, moist, lots of capillaries. Okay, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to answer that question, please. So do the same thing again, Luke. Tell me when you're done.
Finished it.
Right, nice one. Thank you, Luke. Right, again, I'm kind of working on the assumption that everybody's done this, right? Now, Imogen answered it absolutely brilliantly. Right, explain how the VLI and small intestine are adapted to maximise the rate of absorption of digested food products. Right, so if you're asked that question, right, 6-mark question, and what you're doing is you're looking at how well you've written it. Right, so if I was marking a question like that, right, I've said this before, I would then read it and see if it reads well. If it reads well, I'll pretty much give you a mark for it. Then I need to explain they're thin. So the wall, the villi are thin, right, which allows diffusion to happen. There's a good capillary network, large surface area, and I can't remember the fourth one now, right? So what you should do then is you should have all those 4 different things that are in there, right? That will then give you a maximum of 6 marks, right? But brilliant imaging, right? Connecting between the alveoli and the digestive system. If they ask anything else, right, about how to make diffusion more efficient, other than those 2, it's the same 4 answers every single time. Okay, right. Now, what we're going to do is we are just going to do one last little thing. Okay, you've just done that question there. Okay. Now, we're just going to do, and this is probably going to take a few minutes, is we're going to look at this little creature here. Now, it reminds me of a few people this, all right? This is called an axolotl, right? And what it is, it's one of the most amazing creatures that there can ever be, right? Not only does it look incredibly cool, all right, but it can also do certain things that are absolutely brilliant. In a GCSE exam, I'd actually not even heard of one until probably about 6 years ago, and then in the GCSE exam, it asked about an axolotl. So that's then why we make sure we focus.
How satisfying is Pizza Hut's original pan pizza?
Right, what's that? Pizza Hut.
Meet the axolotl, a Mexican salamander that scientists and the internet alike love for their amazing ability to regenerate limbs, and probably for that derpy smile. Hi, I'm Danielle Defoe, and you're watching Animal Logic. Axolotls are members of the Anthistobatidae family and are native to a very small region in Mexico. Axolotls were revered by Aztecs, and their capital city was built on islands in the lakes inhabited by the creatures. But when the Spanish settled in 1521, they drained the lakes and built their city in its place, a first step in driving axolotls towards extinction. As Mexico City continues to grow and loot, the axolotl population is pushed further and further towards the brink. Today, they can only be found in the wild in Mexico's Xochimilco Lake Complex near Mexico City. Axolotls are unique among salamanders because they are neotenic, which means that they reach adulthood without going through metamorphosis. So they retain all the...
Right, so basically what an axolotl does is it keeps its gills so that it can breathe underwater. It can also breathe through its mouth, its lungs, so if it actually comes to the surface, it can actually breathe using lungs, and it can also breathe through its skin. Right, and what the lady then said was that the reason why they are like that is because basically they don't go through puberty. Right, so if you know like a tadpole, little tiny thing there, right, what it does is it's got a body, it's got a tail. Eventually what it does, it grows legs like a frog, right, and then the tail falls off. What an axolotl does is it starts off as something different, but then it keeps all its baby characteristics. And what you've got to do then is you've got to think about the diffusion part of it. It breathes using these things here. And if you actually look at them, right, they've got an incredibly large surface area because they're like a feather. They've got blood vessels going up inside them, right? They're going to be incredibly thin. So they've got all those adaptations that then we've talked about previously.
They're juvenile features. Like us millennials, well, most salamanders will grow up, lose their gills and their dorsal fin as they get bigger and emerge onto land. Axolotls will keep their feathery external gills and remain underwater permanently. It is extremely rare, but sometimes axolotls will reach maturity and go through metamorphosis. But even then, they tend to keep to the water. This has been accomplished in the lab by injecting them with a shot of iodine, after which they more closely resemble their relatives, the tiger salamander. Axolotls can get pretty big, measuring around a foot or 30 centimeters long, fully grown, and they have long lives, around 15 years in the wild. But probably the most interesting thing about them is their intense ability to regenerate. Many amphibians do have the ability to regenerate, but axolotls blow the competition out of the water. Not only can they perfectly and seemingly endlessly regenerate limbs, but they can also regenerate their spinal cord, jaw, tail, and skin, all without scarring. No matter how many times you cut off their limbs, they'll grow back perfectly, every single time. And you wouldn't even be able to tell that you had cut off their limbs in the first place. You could also even cut out a chunk of their spine, come back in a month and a half, and there'll be no worse for wear. They are also 1,000 times more resistant to cancer than any other animal. It works like this. After the amputation, the cells at the site of the amputation will lose their identity. So instead of being skin cells or blood cells, they become similar to stem cells, called pluripotent cells. And they're able to make any cell or tissue that the body would need.
So we then talked about that. So when it gets cut off, right, basically what happens is all those cells that are there lose their individuality. And what they do is they turn into pluripotent stem cells. And a pluripotent stem cell means that it can basically become anything. So it's a bit like our embryonic stem cells we talked about before. And here you can see brain is actually, not brain, bone is actually getting rebuilt. Okay? Incredibly clever.
To repair itself. In this case, they use the pluripotent cells to generate all the cells and tissues needed to create new, perfect limbs. This phenomenon is a favorite among the scientific community for its potential to help burn victims, amputees, and even cancer victims. Scientists have experimented with modifying the genetic makeup of axolotls to include the green fluorescent protein, which is the protein that makes many jellyfish bioluminescent. While not just making axolotls look cooler, the glow of protein allows scientists to see things inside the axolotls that they couldn't before. For example, they'll tag cancerous cells with the protein, and then they can actually see how it spreads throughout their bodies. Even more interesting, that axolotls have plug-and-play body parts. You can amputate one axolotl's leg and place it in another axolotl, and it'll attach itself. It's especially interesting because you don't even need the whole limb, just a few cells. If you take cells from a neon axolotl and place them on an amputated body of an albino axolotl, the albino axolotl will actually grow a neon limb. Since their skin is quite translucent, you can actually watch the neon green bone grow out of an otherwise white axolotl. This has led to some fairly morally compromising work. In a study published in Science magazine in 1968, scientists were able to successfully transplant an axolotl head onto the back of another axolotl. One subject lived for 65 weeks after the operation, with the second head growing right along with the first head. What animal should I check out next? Please let me know in the comments. If you want to support the show and get episodes a week early, you can do so by signing up for a free trial of the
Okay, so that was then just double quickly just about the axolotl and how incredible it is. And that kind of summarizes all the things that we've done about it, right? So what it can do, it can breathe like a fish or a frog, right? It's got the gills on the outside, right? It can also breathe through its mouth. It can also breathe through its skin, right? And it also has incredible regeneration powers, just like, pluripotent stem cells, right? It can grow new ones. And actually said then that it can grow an extra head, but it can't grow an extra head, you can actually plug one on, right? And what it'll do, it'll stay on it. Okay, now, we're actually not going to do any more stuff now, right? Because it's basically coming to the end of the lesson, okay? So, I'm going to turn it off in a second, right? And what I'm going to want you to do is just have a quick read through the other stuff. If you missed anything, I'm going to be putting a link to the actual video itself for the lesson, right? And then hopefully tomorrow, period 1, I'll see a number of you back in. Okay, if anybody's got any questions now, right, possibly the best thing to do is just unmute yourself and ask the questions. Anybody? Okay, right, thank you all for logging in, right, and I will see you soon.